My name is Cassidy Monroe, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm standing in my childhood dining room, staring at my sister across the Thanksgiving table. She just screamed that I get nothing. My parents look mortified. The guests are frozen in shock. I am holding legal documents that were supposed to stay private until after dinner. 3 months ago, Mom and Dad promised me this house. Today, my sister tried to steal it all. Her face is twisted in rage, her fork clenched in her fist like a weapon. Before we dive into how I got here, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Have you ever dealt with family drama over inheritance? Hit that like button if you think fairness matters more than money, and subscribe because this story has more twists than you can imagine. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 3 months before that catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner, I pulled into my parents' driveway after finishing an exhausting evening shift at the community hospital where I work as a nurse. The porch light was on, which was unusual for 9:30 at night. Mom and Dad usually went to bed early. I grabbed my purse and the bag of groceries I'd picked up for them, wondering if something was wrong. My heart was already beating faster as I walked up the familiar steps of the home where I grew up, the white paint peeling slightly near the doorframe, the same crooked welcome mat that had been there since I was a teenager. Mom opened the door before I could knock. Patricia Monroe, my mother, was in her late 60s, and lately, I'd noticed how much she'd aged. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, her movements slower and more deliberate. She smiled when she saw me, but there was something serious in her eyes. Dad was sitting in his recliner in the living room, his hands trembling slightly. Howard Monroe had always been the strong, steady presence in our family, but 6 months ago had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. Watching him struggle with buttons and doorknobs broke my heart every single time. They asked me to sit down, and immediately I felt nervous. Mom took my hand, her twisted fingers squeezing mine with surprising strength. Dad cleared his throat twice before speaking, the way he always did when he had something important to say. They told me they'd been to see their attorney the week before, working on updating their estate plans. The house, this beautiful old Victorian that had been in our family for 40 years, needed to go to someone. They were getting older, their health was declining, and they couldn't manage the upkeep anymore. Dad's Parkinson's made it dangerous for him to climb the stairs. Mom's arthritis meant she could barely open jars or carry laundry baskets. They needed to make decisions while they still could. Then came the part that changed everything. They wanted to transfer the house to me, not split it, not sell it, and divide the money, give it entirely to me, Cassidy, their younger daughter. I sat there stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. Mom explained their reasoning with tears in her eyes. For the past 5 years, I'd been the one helping them. Every week, I came over to take them to medical appointments, to pick up prescriptions, to do their grocery shopping. I paid their utility bills when they forgot, fixed their leaking faucet, cleaned their gutters, shoveled their driveway in winter. I'd given up opportunities to advance in my nursing career because I couldn't leave them alone. I worked double shifts to make ends meet for my 7-year-old daughter Lily and myself while still finding time to be there for my parents. My sister Natasha, on the other hand, had moved to California 10 years ago. She married Derek, a tech executive, and built what appeared to be a glamorous life in San Francisco. She had a $1 million home, luxury cars, designer everything. She rarely visited, maybe once every 2 years, and her phone calls were brief and superficial. She didn't need this house. She didn't need anything from them. Meanwhile, I was raising Lily alone in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, working constantly just to keep our heads above water. My ex-husband had left when Lily was 2, and I hadn't heard from him since. Every month was a struggle with overdue bills, and Lily wore mostly second-hand clothes because that's all I could afford. The house represented something beyond just property to me. It represented stability for Lily, a real childhood home with a backyard and a neighborhood with good schools. It represented not having to worry about rent increases or whether my landlord would sell the building. It represented roots, family, continuity. I started crying right there at the kitchen table, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief and hope for the first time in years. I hugged my parents, thanking them over and over, promising I would take care of them and the house for as long as they needed. But then came the condition. They made me promise not to tell Natasha yet. They wanted to break the news to her gently during Thanksgiving, when the whole family would be together. They thought it would be easier that way, more personal, less shocking than a phone call or letter. They believed Natasha would understand, that she'd see the logic and fairness in their decision. I agreed. Even though something in my gut told me this was a mistake, I should have trusted that instinct. As I left that night, carrying my hope like a fragile glass ornament, I noticed an expensive car parked down the street. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Natasha showed up unannounced. I was at my parents' house helping Dad with his medication schedule when I heard the car pull up. Through the window, I watched my sister step out of a rental Mercedes, all designer clothes and expensive sunglasses, her husband Derek following behind carrying matching luggage. My stomach dropped. Natasha never visited without months of advance notice. Something was wrong. She swept into the house like she owned it, barely acknowledging me before kissing Mom and Dad on the cheeks. She immediately started criticizing everything. The furniture was outdated, the paint was chipped, the appliances were ancient. She made it sound like our parents were living in squalor, which wasn't true. It was an older home, sure, but it was clean and comfortable and full of memories. Then she turned her attention to me, looking me up and down in my worn scrubs and practical sneakers. She asked if I was still driving that old Honda, the one with the dented bumper. Her tone made it clear she pitied me, which made my blood boil. That evening, Natasha announced she was taking Mom and Dad out to dinner at the expensive Italian restaurant downtown. She specifically didn't invite me, saying I was probably too tired from work and wouldn't want to go. The dismissal stung, but I left, returning to my apartment, where Lily was waiting with the babysitter. I tried not to think about what Natasha might be saying during that dinner, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Later, I found out exactly what happened. During that dinner, Natasha planted seeds of doubt with surgical precision. She told our parents that I seemed overwhelmed, that maybe I couldn't handle more responsibility. She pointed out that the house needed extensive repairs, new roof, updated electrical, modern plumbing, and suggested that such projects might be too much for someone on a nurse's salary. She casually mentioned that she'd been talking to estate planners in California, high-powered professionals who had ideas for maximizing the value of family assets. She never directly said they should change their plans, but she painted a picture of me as struggling and incapable, while positioning herself as successful and knowledgeable. A few days later, Mom accidentally let something slip during one of my visits. She mentioned that Natasha had been talking about selling the house and splitting the proceeds between us sisters. My heart stopped. That wasn't the plan. That had never been the plan. If they sold the house, where would my parents live? And splitting the money meant it'd get maybe $250,000. Not enough for a down payment on anything comparable in this market, and certainly not enough to provide the stable home I wanted for Lily. I realized with growing horror that Natasha didn't want the house itself, she wanted the cash. I gently confronted my parents, asking if they were reconsidering their decision. They reassured me that nothing had changed, but I could hear the uncertainty in their voices. They seemed less confident than before, more confused. Natasha was getting to them, filling their heads with complicated financial scenarios and making them question their original instincts. I tried to stay calm, tried to trust that my parents would stick to their word, but anxiety was creeping in like cold water. Then came the real blow. Natasha convinced my parents to delay signing the transfer papers until Thanksgiving. She claimed she wanted the whole family together for such an important decision, that it would be more meaningful that way. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. In reality, it gave her more time to manipulate them. My parents agreed, thinking it was a kind and thoughtful suggestion. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet, but didn't know how to stop it. Natasha extended her stay, claiming she wanted to help with Thanksgiving preparations. But I knew the truth. She was staying to undermine me at every opportunity, to whisper doubts into our parents' ears whenever I wasn't around. She and Derek checked into a hotel, but spent every day at the house, bringing gifts, cooking meals, being the attentive daughter she'd never been before. And I had to work, had to keep my job and pay my bills, which meant I couldn't be there to counter her influence. I was losing ground, and I didn't know how to fight back without looking desperate or aggressive. The week before Thanksgiving became a nightmare. Natasha started visiting my parents every single day while I was at work. Shed arrived mid-morning with fresh pastries and expensive coffee, staying for hours, building her case against me one careful comment at a time. She brought them gifts, a new tablet for Dad so he could video chat with her, a gorgeous cashmere shawl for Mom. She made subtle comparisons between our lives, sighing about how she wished she lived closer like I did, but her demanding career in tech consulting kept her so busy. She made her absence sound noble, like a sacrifice she was making for professional success. But the real damage was more insidious. Natasha started leaving things around the house. Financial magazines with articles about elder abuse and exploitation. Stories about adult children who manipulated elderly parents for inheritance. She never directly accused me of anything. She didn't have to. She just planted the magazines where Mom and Dad would find them, let them read the horror stories, and allowed their imaginations to do the rest. It was psychological warfare, and she was winning. One afternoon, Natasha took things further. She'd gone through my car while I was inside visiting with our parents. I'd left it unlocked, never imagining my own sister would violate my privacy like that. She found the stack of overdue bill notices on my passenger seat, the ones I was too embarrassed to bring inside. She photographed them. Then, during a private conversation with our parents, she expressed concern about my financial desperation. She showed them the photos, framing it as worry for my well-being. She suggested that maybe I was pressuring them because I desperately needed money, not because I wanted to care for them. The narrative she built was perfect. I was the struggling single mother, drowning in debt, willing to do anything for financial relief. She was the successful, stable daughter who only wanted to protect our vulnerable parents from being taken advantage of. She positioned herself as the hero and me as the potential villain, and because I didn't know what she was doing, I couldn't defend myself. I started noticing changes in how my parents treated me. They became distant, asking uncomfortable questions about my finances. How much debt did I have? Was I managing okay? Did I need money? The questions felt loaded, suspicious. Mom mentioned something about making sure all their decisions were made freely, without pressure. I was confused and hurt. I hadn't pressured them about anything. If anything, I'd tried to talk them out of giving me the house at first, saying it was too generous. But now they were looking at me like I was some kind of predator circling their assets. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked directly if something was wrong, if someone had said something to make them doubt me. They exchanged glances but wouldn't explain. They just kept saying they wanted to be fair to both daughters, that they needed to think carefully about big decisions. I tried to defend myself, but everything I said sounded desperate and defensive, which only made things worse. I could feel the promise slipping away like sand through my fingers. Then Natasha made her move. She invited me to lunch, just the two of us, playing the role of concerned big sister. We met at a cafe downtown, and she put on a performance worthy of an award. She said she knew things had been hard for me, that she understood how difficult it must be raising Lily alone on a nurse's salary. She offered to help by suggesting I could live in the house while she owned it, renting it to me at a family discount rate. She made it sound generous, reasonable, kind, but I saw through it immediately. If Natasha owned the house, it'd be at her mercy. She could raise the rent, sell it out from under me, evict me whenever she wanted. It'd have no security, no real home. It was a trap designed to look like a gift. I refused, probably more angrily than I should have. I told her the house was promised to me, that Mom and Dad made their decision months ago, and she needed to respect it. Natasha's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw cold calculation in her eyes. Then she recovered, looking wounded and hurt. Of course, she went straight to our parents and told them I'd screamed at her for trying to help. She painted herself as the victim of my unreasonable anger, someone who'd only been trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. She cried, saying she felt rejected and attacked. And my parents, already primed by weeks of manipulation, believed her version. When I came by that evening, they were cool toward me. Dad asked if I'd had words with Natasha. I tried to explain what really happened, but they'd already made up their minds about who was telling the truth. 4 days before Thanksgiving, Natasha made her boldest move yet. I stopped by my parents' house after my shift, exhausted and worried. When I walked in, I found Natasha sitting at the dining room table with a man in an expensive suit. Mom and Dad were seated across from them, looking pale and confused. The man was introduced as Bennett Cole, an attorney Natasha had brought with her. My entire body went cold. On the table was a stack of official-looking documents. Bennett was explaining something about a revised estate plan, using complicated legal terminology that clearly overwhelmed my parents. The plan he was describing would require the house to be sold immediately, with proceeds split 50-50 between Natasha and me. He made it sound like the only logical option, the fairest solution, the way to prevent family conflict. The documents had blank spaces waiting for my parents' signatures. Natasha was crying again, real tears streaming down her face. She told Mom and Dad that she felt excluded and unloved, that giving everything to Cassidy sent a message that she didn't matter to them anymore. Derek backed her up, throwing around financial terms like capital gains and market analysis. They were tag-teaming our parents, overwhelming them with emotion and logic simultaneously. It was a carefully orchestrated attack. Dad, to his credit, tried to resist. Despite the Parkinson's tremor in his hands, he straightened his shoulders and said he wanted to wait, that he needed to review everything with his own attorney first. But Natasha's response was vicious. Her tears stopped instantly, replaced by cold fury. She said if they chose Cassidy over her, she'd leave and never come back. She'd cut them out of her life completely. They'd never see their grandchildren, never get another phone call, never be part of her family again. It was emotional blackmail, and it was working. Mom started crying, caught between her daughters, terrified of losing either one. I walked in right at that moment, carrying Lily's hand. Wed stopped by to drop off groceries. Through the doorway, I could see my parents looking absolutely terrified, Bennett with his pen ready, Natasha with her ultimatum hanging in the air. When they saw me, the lawyer quickly started gathering the documents. I demanded to know what was happening. Natasha claimed they were just updating some paperwork, nothing important. But I saw my name mentioned on the papers, and I grabbed them before Bennett could pack them away. As I scanned the documents, rage flooded through me. This wasn't just a suggestion or discussion. These were actual legal papers designed to override the promise my parents had made to me. Natasha was trying to force them to sign away my future right there at the kitchen table, using pressure and fear and manipulation. I confronted her directly, asking how she could do this to our own parents, how she could swoop in after 10 years of absence and try to steal everything. The argument that erupted was explosive. Natasha accused me of manipulating sick, elderly parents for personal gain. She said I'd taken advantage of their declining health to trick them into giving me everything. I fired back that she'd abandoned our family for a decade, only returning when she smelled money. I pointed out that she had a mansion in San Francisco, while I could barely afford my apartment. She didn't need this house, she just wanted to take it from me. Mom and Dad tried to stop us, but they were overwhelmed. Lily started crying, scared by the shouting. And Natasha, in a move of stunning cruelty, used my daughter's tears as evidence against me. She told our parents that this proved I was an unfit mother who created chaos and drama. She said Lily would be traumatized by all this conflict, that it would be better for everyone if we just sold the house and split the money cleanly. She made my child's distress, which she had caused, into a weapon against me. Bennett and Natasha left after that, claiming they'd return when things were calmer. But the damage was catastrophic. My parents were shaken, upset, confused about what was true and who to believe. I tried to comfort them, tried to explain that Natasha was manipulating them, but they were too overwhelmed to hear me. They asked both Natasha and me not to visit until Thanksgiving. They needed space to think, they said. They needed to figure things out on their own. I left heartbroken, holding Lily's hand, feeling like I'd already lost. Natasha had positioned herself as reasonable while making me look unstable. She had professional legal support while I had nothing. She had money and resources while I had exhaustion and desperation. Walking to my car, I realized I was fighting a battle I didn't know how to win, and Thanksgiving was only days away. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I got a phone call from Uncle Roger, my mother's brother. He'd always been close to our family, attending every birthday and holiday, giving advice when asked. I'd always considered him an ally, someone who understood how much I'd sacrificed for my parents. When he asked to meet me for coffee, I actually felt hopeful. Maybe he'd heard about the conflict and wanted to help mediate. Maybe he'd talk sense into Natasha. We met at a diner near the hospital where I worked. Roger arrived early, already sipping coffee when I got there. He gave me a hug that felt stiff, and I knew immediately something was wrong. We sat down, and he didn't waste time with small talk. He told me that Natasha had called him the night before, explaining her version of everything happening, and Head believed her. Completely. Roger said he thought splitting the proceeds from selling the house was the most fair solution. He argued that Id already benefited from living near our parents, that Id had their company and support all these years while Natasha had been far away. He suggested that I was being selfish and greedy, wanting everything for myself when Natasha deserved her share. Each word felt like a slap. This was the Uncle Hode watched me drive our parents to chemotherapy appointments, Hode seen me sacrifice career opportunities to be available for family emergencies, and now he was calling me selfish. Then came the real betrayal. Roger admitted that Natasha had promised him a 10% finder's fee if he could convince our parents to sell. 10% of a house worth over $500,000. $50,000 for him, just for acting as her agent. He didn't even seem embarrassed about the conflict of interest. He genuinely believed he was helping the family while conveniently making money in the process. I felt completely isolated. If Natasha had gotten to Uncle Roger with money, who else had she bought off? Who else was secretly on her side? Roger told me he was going to our parents' house that afternoon to mediate before Thanksgiving. He was going to present Natasha's plan as a neutral compromise. I begged him not to, tried to explain what Natasha was really doing, but he dismissed me. He said I was emotional and biased, that I needed to think about what was really fair. Later that day, Roger went to Mom and Dad's house. I wasn't there, but Mom told me about it later. Roger brought spreadsheets and calculators. He showed them that if they sold the house for its current market value, each daughter would receive approximately $250,000. He made it sound like a fortune, emphasizing how much that money would mean to Natasha's family. She had 2 children, he reminded them, children who would need college funds. Didn't they want to help their grandchildren? Didn't they want to be fair? Our parents started to waver. The money did seem substantial. Maybe they had been too hasty promising everything to me. Maybe Roger was right about fairness. He stayed for 3 hours, slowly dismantling their original decision with financial logic and emotional appeals. By the time he left, they were seriously reconsidering everything. While Roger was there, Natasha called. Shed timed it perfectly, of course. They put her on speakerphone, and her voice was sweet and reasonable. She said she only wanted what was fair for everyone, that Shed never want to hurt Cassidy or take anything away from her. She mentioned her 2 children, how they were growing up so far from their grandparents, how a college fund would mean everything. She played on their guilt about being distant grandparents, about not being more involved in those children's lives. That evening, Mom called me. Her voice was shaking. She said they were reconsidering the original plan, that maybe they'd moved too fast in promising me the house. She said they needed to think about both daughters, both sets of grandchildren. She said they'd discuss everything at Thanksgiving dinner, make a final decision then. I begged her to remember why they'd made their choice in the first place, to remember the 5 years I'd spent caring for them. But she just kept saying they needed to be fair, needed to think carefully. When I hung up, I felt defeated. I sat on my apartment floor and cried while Lily slept in the next room. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd hoped for, was slipping away. Natasha was going to win. Shed manipulated everyone, bought off the people who should have supported me, and turned my own sacrifice into evidence of desperation. I didn't know how to fight someone who had unlimited resources and no conscience. But then, something shifted. I couldn't sleep that night, so I started researching. I looked up terms like elder manipulation and undue influence. I found article after article describing exactly what Natasha was doing. Sudden changes in estate plans, isolation from other family members, pressure tactics, financial incentives to third parties. It was textbook elder abuse. And it was illegal. I found a lawyer who specialized in elder law, a woman named Martha Reeves. I called her office first thing in the morning, explaining the situation through tears. She agreed to review everything pro bono after hearing my story. But she told me I needed evidence, documentation of what Natasha was doing. I started writing everything down, creating a timeline of visits and conversations. I saved text messages from Uncle Roger that mentioned the finder's fee. I prepared for war. Thanksgiving Day arrived like an execution date. I dressed Lily in her nicest outfit, a blue dress I'd found at a thrift store and carefully mended. I wore the one professional outfit I owned that wasn't scrubs, trying to look put together even though I'd barely slept. My hands were shaking as I drove to my parents' house, Lily chattering excitedly in the back seat about seeing Grandma and Grandpa. She had no idea what was about to happen. I envied her innocence. When we arrived, Natasha and Derek were already there, and they'd positioned themselves like they owned the place. Natasha was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair and makeup perfect. Derek stood beside her in an expensive suit, looking every bit the successful executive. They'd essentially taken over hosting duties, greeting extended family members as they arrived. Uncle Roger was there with his wife, Aunt Pamela. My cousins had come. And there was Dorothy Schaefer, our neighbor for 30 years, a kind woman who'd always treated me like a second daughter. The dining room table was set formally, clearly Natasha's doing. She'd positioned herself at one end opposite our parents, like she was co-hosting. I ended up squeezed between Lily and my cousin, feeling like a guest in my own childhood home. The atmosphere was tense despite everyone's attempts at normal Thanksgiving conversation. I noticed a manila envelope on the side table near Dad's chair, and my stomach dropped. Those had to be documents. Dinner was torture. Every bite tasted like sawdust in my mouth. Natasha dominated the conversation, talking about her supposedly successful life in California. She made subtle jabs at me throughout the meal, complimenting my simple outfit in a tone that made it clear she pitied my poverty. Derek joined in with jokes about my old car parked outside next to their rental Mercedes. Uncle Roger was cold to me, overly warm to Natasha. My parents seemed nervous and withdrawn, barely eating. I focused on cutting Lily's turkey, trying to stay calm. After the main course, but before dessert, Natasha stood up. She tapped her wine glass with her fork, calling for everyone's attention. My heart started racing. This was it. She thanked everyone for coming, said how wonderful it was to have the whole family together. She talked about the importance of family values and fairness. Every word was calculated, setting the stage for what came next. Then she reached for the manila envelope. She pulled out papers with a flourish, holding them up for everyone to see. She announced that she had important news to share. Our parents had made a decision about the family home, she said. They'd signed papers that morning, before anyone arrived. The house would be sold immediately, with proceeds split equally between both daughters. It was the fair solution, the right solution. She'd already contacted a real estate agent, she continued. The listing would go live next week. They'd have everything wrapped up by Christmas. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I looked at my parents, desperately searching their faces for some sign that this wasn't true. But they wouldn't meet my eyes. They'd actually done it. They'd signed under Natasha's pressure, had given in to her manipulation. Everything they'd promised me 3 months ago was gone. The hope I'd carried, the future I'd planned for Lily, the reward for 5 years of sacrifice, all stolen in one morning. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I asked to see the documents. Natasha refused, holding them away from me like I was a child reaching for something forbidden. She said it didn't concern me anymore, calling me little sister in a condescending tone that made my blood boil. Uncle Roger told me to accept it gracefully, that it was done and arguing would only make things worse. I reached for the envelope, and Natasha held it high above her head, smirking. That's when she said the words that had been playing in my head for days. "You get nothing, Cassidy, you get nothing." Lily saw my face and started crying. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel my pain. She grabbed my hand, asking what was wrong, why was everyone being mean to Mommy? And Natasha, with stunning cruelty, used my daughter's tears against me one more time. She told everyone to look at this, to see how I was making a scene at Thanksgiving, scaring my own child. She painted me as unstable, dramatic, inappropriate. But something inside me snapped. Not into rage or despair, but into clarity. I'd spent weeks being defensive, reactive, trying to prove I wasn't what Natasha claimed. But I'd been fighting wrong. I had evidence, I had documentation, I had the truth, and I had Martha Reeves, the lawyer who'd agreed to help me. It was time to stop defending and start attacking. I pulled out my phone with steady hands. I scrolled to Martha's number and hit call, then immediately put it on speaker. The room went silent. Martha answered on the second ring, her professional voice filling the shocked silence. I explained briefly that we were at Thanksgiving dinner, that documents had been signed that morning under pressure, and I needed her legal expertise. Could she please explain to everyone present what constituted undue influence under state law? Martha's voice was clear and authoritative. She defined undue influence as excessive persuasion that overpowers a person's free will, particularly concerning elderly individuals with health issues. She explained that sudden changes in long-standing estate plans raise red flags. She listed warning signs: isolation from other family members, pressure tactics, involvement of interested parties in the signing process, rapid timeline that prevents careful consideration. Every single thing she described matched exactly what Natasha had done. The lawyer asked to speak to my parents directly. I handed my phone to Dad, whose hands were shaking worse than usual. Martha asked him simple questions. Had he felt rushed? Had he been given time to consult with his own attorney? Had anyone pressured him emotionally? Dad's voice was quiet but honest. Yes. Had felt rushed. No, he hadn't spoken to his attorney. Yes, Natasha had been calling daily, sometimes crying, saying she'd cut off contact if they didn't sign. Mom started crying beside him, nodding along to his answers. Then I played my hand. I pulled out my own folder, the one I'd been preparing for days. I showed the timeline of Natasha's visits, every single manipulation tactic documented with dates and details. I presented text messages from Uncle Roger explicitly mentioning the 10% finder's fee Natasha had promised him. I showed financial records proving Natasha and Derek made over $400,000 annually and lived in $1 million home. They didn't need money. This was pure greed. Then I contrasted it with my own life, my modest nursing salary, barely $45,000 a year, my stack of bills, my struggles to provide for Lily. But more importantly, I showed 5 years of documentation, appointment reminder notes in my handwriting, grocery receipts from shopping for my parents, photos of me painting their fence, fixing their porch, planting their garden, texts from Mom thanking me for driving them to the hospital, evidence of consistent, unpaid caregiving while Natasha was absent. The room was dead silent. Every eye was on those documents, on the undeniable proof of who had actually been there for this family. Dorothy spoke up first. She stood up, her voice shaking with emotion, and said she'd watched me care for my parents for years. She'd seen me arrive exhausted from double shifts to shovel their driveway. She'd witnessed Natasha refuse to come home even for Christmas. She described watching Natasha ignore phone calls from Mom, seeing the hurt on my parents' faces when their older daughter couldn't be bothered. Aunt Pamela, Uncle Roger's own wife, stood next. She said quietly that she was uncomfortable with how Roger had gotten involved, that the money had clouded his judgment. She apologized for not speaking up sooner. One by one, people who'd been silent found their voices. My cousins remembered how I'd always been there. Dorothy recounted specific instances of my sacrifice. The narrative Natasha had built was crumbling. Martha's voice came through the phone speaker again. She stated officially that the documents signed that morning appeared to be the result of undue influence. They could be challenged in court and would likely be invalidated. More importantly, my parents had the right to revoke them immediately if they chose. The original promise to me had been documented in earlier attorney meetings, complete with notes showing their clear intent and sound mental state before Natasha's interference. Those earlier documents would hold more weight. Then Derek cracked. Natasha's husband suddenly spoke up, his voice strained. He said Head told Natasha to handle this situation, to do whatever it took, because they needed the money. The facade of their perfect life shattered in one sentence. His tech company wasn't successful. It was failing. They weren't wealthy. They were drowning in debt. The mansion, the cars, the designer clothes, all of it was leveraged to the hilt. They were facing bankruptcy. They desperately needed the house sale to avoid losing everything. Natasha's face went white, then red. She tried to shut Derek up, but he kept talking. He pulled out his phone and showed bank statements, proof of their financial crisis. Credit card debt in the hundreds of thousands, mortgage payments they could barely make. The whole successful California life was a lie. They weren't helping my parents make a smart financial decision. They were trying to save themselves using family money. The truth was finally out. Every manipulation, every lie, every cruel tactic had been motivated by Natasha's secret desperation. My parents looked devastated. Uncle Roger stared at the floor, realizing he'd been used. The finder's fee had been promised probably never existed. Natasha had played everyone, and now her entire scheme was exposed in front of the whole family. With Martha still on speaker, I asked Natasha to hand over the documents she'd been waving around. She refused, clutching them against her chest like a life preserver. But Dad stood up, his voice stronger than I'd heard in months, and told her to give him the papers. She had no choice. With shaking hands, she passed them to him, and he passed them to me. I held my phone up so Martha could see the documents through video. She examined them carefully, her lawyer's eyes scanning every detail. Then she pointed out the fatal flaw. The signatures had been witnessed only by Uncle Roger and Derek, both of whom had financial interests in the outcome. Roger was expecting his finder's fee. Derek desperately needed the money from the sale. Having interested parties serve as witnesses created a massive conflict of interest that could easily invalidate the entire document. Furthermore, Martha explained, the document had been prepared by Bennett Cole, an attorney who represented Natasha's interests, not my parents' interests. My parents had signed paperwork prepared by the opposing party without their own legal representation present. Any court would see this as highly suspicious, especially given the rapid timeline and my parents' documented health conditions. The Parkinson's, the arthritis, the confusion they'd admitted to feeling. All of it pointed toward elder abuse. Natasha's fury finally exploded. She stopped playing the victim and revealed who she really was. She screamed at me across the table, calling me a pathetic single mother living in poverty. She said I didn't deserve the house, that I was a loser who couldn't even keep a husband. She brought up Lily's father, the man who'd abandoned us, using my most painful wound as a weapon. She called me a failure, said I wanted to steal from my own family because I was too incompetent to succeed on my own. The attacks hit every insecurity I had. My failed marriage, my financial struggles, my inability to give Lily the life I wanted for her. For a moment, I felt tears coming, felt the old shame rising up. I wanted to run away, to hide from everyone seeing my pain. But then Lily squeezed my hand hard. She looked up at me with her big brown eyes and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You're the best mommy in the whole world. Don't cry." My 7-year-old daughter gave me the strength Natasha's cruelty had almost taken. I straightened my shoulders and looked my sister in the eye. I told her that she was right. I wasn't wealthy or successful by her standards, but I'd been there. When Dad fell and needed someone to take him to the emergency room at 2 a.m, I was there. When Mom couldn't remember if she'd taken her medication and needed someone to organize her pills, I was there. When they were lonely and scared about getting older, I was there. Where was Natasha? Living her fake perfect life 3,000 miles away, too busy to even answer the phone. Dorothy stood again and shared specific memories. She described the time I'd spent an entire weekend repainting the house exterior because my parents couldn't afford to hire someone. She remembered when I'd taken a week off work without pay to care for Mom after her hip surgery. She recounted Christmas after Christmas where I'd shown up with Lily while Natasha sent expensive gifts but never visited. She told Natasha directly that money couldn't buy back the years of presents and love she'd denied our parents. Martha interjected with the legal facts. The documents my parents had signed that morning were being officially challenged. She was filing paperwork immediately to freeze any sale of the property pending investigation of elder abuse. The original transfer agreement to me, which had been properly prepared by my parents' long-standing attorney with appropriate waiting periods and independent witnesses, would stand. That was the document that reflected their true wishes, made when they were under no pressure and had full capacity to decide. Then Derek spoke again, and this time he wouldn't stop even though Natasha was glaring daggers at him. He admitted that the whole plan had been his idea initially. When they'd first gotten into financial trouble 6 months ago, Head suggested Natasha reconnect with her family to see if there were assets they could access. He'd been the one who encouraged her to visit, to manipulate, to push for the sale. He showed more bank statements, credit card bills, letters from creditors. They were going to lose their house in California within 3 months if they didn't get money somewhere. The confession destroyed Natasha's last shred of credibility. Even the family members who'd been neutral or supportive of her were now backing away. Uncle Roger stood up and said quietly that he'd been fooled, that he was sorry. He admitted Natasha had promised him money to convince my parents, and had let greed cloud his judgment. He apologized directly to me and to Mom and Dad. He said he was leaving and wouldn't blame anyone if they never forgave him. Aunt Pamela stayed, moving her chair closer to mine in a show of support. My parents were crying now, truly understanding how thoroughly Natasha had manipulated them. Mom kept saying she was sorry, that she should have trusted her instincts, that she'd known something felt wrong, but Natasha had been so convincing. Dad put his arm around her, his own tears falling. He looked at me and said that their original decision had been right. I was the daughter who'd earned this house through years of love and sacrifice. That hadn't changed, just because Natasha had shown up with her schemes and lies. But there was one more document that needed to be handled. I asked Martha what we should do to make everything official and uncontestable. She said we needed to have the proper transfer papers signed right then, with proper witnesses who had no conflicts of interest. Dorothy and Aunt Pamela could serve as witnesses. Martha would notarize via video, which was legal in our state. We could finalize everything immediately, before Natasha had any chance to interfere again. Dad went to his study and retrieved the original documents, the ones prepared by his own attorney 3 months ago. The ones that reflected the promise he'd made to me when Natasha was nowhere in sight. He and Mom sat at the table, and with Dorothy and Aunt Pamela as witnesses, they signed the house transfer to me. Martha notarized it through the video call, making it official and legal. The house was mine. Natasha watched all of this happening, and something broke in her. She grabbed the Thanksgiving documents she'd been so proud of, and started tearing them into pieces, screaming about how unfair this was. She said terrible things, calling our parents senile and incompetent, calling me a manipulative witch, calling everyone in the room fools. She announced that she was done with this family, that we'd never hear from her again. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Derek tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away viciously. She screamed at him that this was his fault, that his failed business had ruined everything, that she never should have married him. Their marriage was imploding right there in front of us. Derek apologized to my parents one more time, his face full of genuine shame, and followed his wife out. We heard their car engine start aggressively, tires screeching as they drove away. The house felt incredibly quiet after Natasha and Derek left. The Thanksgiving dinner sat half-eaten on the table. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the emotional chaos. The rest of us sat in stunned silence, processing everything that had just happened. I held the signed documents in my hands, barely believing this was real. After weeks of attacks and manipulation, I'd won. But the victory felt hollow, painful. Mom broke the silence first. She apologized again, her voice broken with tears. She explained that Natasha had been so convincing, so persistent, wearing them down day after day. Natasha had made them doubt their own judgment, made them feel guilty for favoring one daughter over another. The manipulation had been sophisticated and relentless. Dad added that they'd felt trapped, afraid of losing Natasha completely if they didn't give her what she wanted. They'd signed that morning in a moment of weakness and fear, immediately regretting it but not knowing how to undo it. I moved to sit between them, taking both their hands. I told them I understood, that Natasha was a master manipulator. I'd almost fallen for her tactics too, almost believed I was the problem. The important thing was that the truth had come out, that they'd ultimately stood by their original decision. I promised them that I would take care of them and the house for as long as they needed. That had always been my intention, long before any promise of inheritance. Dorothy spoke up, saying she'd witnessed something important today. She'd seen what real family looked like versus what fake family looked like. Natasha had shown up with expensive gifts and empty words, but I'd shown up with years of presence and genuine love. Money couldn't compete with that. Aunt Pamela agreed, saying she was ashamed of her husband's role in this but proud of how I'd stood my ground. My cousins, who'd been quiet throughout most of the drama, came over to hug me, apologizing for not defending me more vocally. Over the next hour, we cleaned up the disaster of Thanksgiving dinner together. It felt therapeutic somehow, restoring order to the physical space while our emotional space was still reeling. Lily woke up and asked if Aunt Natasha was coming back. I told her honestly that I didn't know, but that sometimes families go through hard times and need space from each other. She seemed to accept that answer, going back to playing with the toys Grandma had set out for her. The following week was a whirlwind of legal activity. Martha helped us file all the proper paperwork to make the house transfer completely official and recorded with the county. She also filed a restraining order preventing Natasha from contacting my parents directly for 90 days, giving them time to recover from her emotional manipulation without interference. My parents insisted on this protection, saying they needed distance to heal. Martha also reported the situation to Adult Protective Services as a suspected case of elder financial abuse. An investigation was opened, though ultimately no criminal charges were filed, since WED caught it in time. The house inspection happened. The title transfer went through. By early December, I was legally the owner of my childhood home, with my parents retaining a life estate that allowed them to live there as long as they wanted. I started making plans to move Lily and myself in after the new year. I converted the garage into a small but comfortable apartment for Mom and Dad, giving them independence while keeping them close enough for me to help with daily tasks. During those weeks, I heard nothing from Natasha. No apology, no explanation, no attempt at reconciliation. The silence hurt, but I understood it. Shed burned every bridge in spectacular fashion. Derek, however, sent a long email apologizing for his role in everything. He explained that their financial situation had made him desperate, but that was no excuse for targeting my family. He said they were in marriage counseling, trying to rebuild their relationship. They'd filed for bankruptcy and were starting over. He asked if he could occasionally video call my parents, not with Natasha but just himself, to maintain some family connection. After discussing it with Mom and Dad, I agreed to facilitate occasional calls. 3 months after that catastrophic Thanksgiving, my life looked completely different. Lily and I had moved into the family house. My daughter had her own room for the first time in her life, painted lavender at her request, with space for all her toys and books. She was thriving in the local elementary school, making friends in the neighborhood, riding her bike on the same sidewalks where I'd ridden mine 30 years ago. The stability had transformed her. She was more confident, happier, secure in ways she'd never been in our cramped apartment. Mom and Dad were doing better too. Living in the converted garage apartment, they had independence but also immediate access to help when they needed it. I could check on them multiple times a day without it feeling intrusive. Dad's Parkinson's was being managed more effectively, now that I could oversee his medication schedule properly. Mom's arthritis had improved with the physical therapy I'd arranged and could now drive her to regularly. They had family dinners with us every evening, and Lily spent hours with her grandparents, building the kind of relationship that distance had prevented with Natasha's children. I'd struggled initially with anger and hurt over Natasha's betrayal. The things she'd said, the ways she'd attacked my deepest insecurities, those wounds took time to heal. I started seeing a therapist, working through my feelings about family, worthiness, and forgiveness. Slowly, I came to understand that Natasha's cruelty had come from her own pain and desperation. That didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me find compassion underneath my hurt. I learned that I could acknowledge her suffering while still maintaining boundaries to protect myself and my family. 3 months after Thanksgiving, Natasha sent an email. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. She said she'd handled things poorly, that desperation had made her act in ways she wasn't proud of. She revealed that she and Derek were in intensive marriage counseling, working through their issues. They'd filed for bankruptcy and were starting completely over, this time with honesty instead of pretense. She asked if she could video call Mom and Dad sometimes, if the door might be open for some kind of relationship in the future. I talked with my parents about it. They were hurt but also sad for their daughter. They'd watched her self-destruct and wanted to believe she could heal. We agreed that supervised video calls could happen, brief conversations where I'd be present to ensure nobody was being manipulated. The calls started awkwardly but gradually became more natural. Natasha seemed genuinely humbled by losing everything. She asked about their health, shared honest details about her therapy and financial recovery. She didn't mention the house, or money. It was a start, though trust would take years to rebuild if it could be rebuilt at all. The relationship with my parents deepened in beautiful ways. Without the stress of financial worry, they could simply enjoy their remaining years. We took day trips to places they'd always wanted to see but never had time for. We had movie nights and game nights with Lily. We cooked together, gardened together, existed together in the rhythms of multi-generational family life. Dad taught Lily how to play chess. Mom taught her how to bake her famous apple pie. These were the moments that mattered, the real inheritance. Dorothy and Aunt Pamela became even closer friends. They visited regularly, and Dorothy often watched Lily when I needed to work extra shifts. Uncle Roger tried to apologize several times, but the betrayal had damaged our relationship permanently. I was polite but distant. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Aunt Pamela understood and didn't push, maintaining her own relationship with us separately from her husband. I managed to advance my nursing career in ways I hadn't thought possible. With stable housing and my parents' help with childcare, I could take evening classes online. I was working toward becoming a nurse practitioner, a dream I'd set aside years ago. The house had given me more than shelter. It had given me the foundation to build the life I'd always wanted for Lily and myself. Looking back on that terrible Thanksgiving, I understood something important. When Natasha had said, "You get nothing," Shed meant to destroy me. Shed wanted me to feel worthless, defeated, without hope. But Shed been wrong about what mattered. I'd already had everything important long before the house was officially mine. I had my daughter's love. I had my parents' trust and respect. I had my integrity intact. I had the knowledge that I'd done the right things for the right reasons, even when it was hard. The house was wonderful, yes. It provided security and stability that changed our lives. But the real inheritance wasn't property or money. It was knowing who I was, standing firm in my values, and having the courage to fight for what was right even against overwhelming opposition. It was learning that true wealth is measured in relationships, in presence, in love, that shows up day after day even when nobody's watching or keeping score. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't fought back that Thanksgiving. If I'd let Natasha's manipulation stand, let her steal what my parents wanted me to have, the house would have been sold. Mom and Dad would have lost their home of 40 years. The money would have temporarily solved Natasha's financial problems, but wouldn't have addressed the deeper issues in her life. And I would have taught Lily that standing up for yourself doesn't matter, that bullies and manipulators always win. I'm grateful I found the strength to fight. I also learned about grace in unexpected places. Natasha had been cruel and manipulative, but Shed also been desperate and broken. Holding on to anger would have poisoned me without affecting her. Choosing to leave the door open, even just a crack, for possible future reconciliation wasn't about excusing her behavior. It was about refusing to let her actions turn me into someone bitter and hard. I could maintain boundaries while still having compassion. Those two things weren't contradictory. The greatest gift the whole experience gave me was clarity about what matters. Not success as the world defines it, not wealth or status or impressive careers, but showing up for the people you love, being present in the small moments, caring for aging parents with patience, raising children with integrity, building a life based on values instead of appearances. Those are the things that last, that give meaning, that you can be proud of when you're old and looking back. Now, as I watch Lily play in the backyard where I once played, as I help Dad with his physical therapy exercises, as I share coffee with Mom in the morning before work, I feel wealthy beyond measure. Not because I own this house, though I'm grateful for it, but because I know what I'm made of. I know I can face challenges and come out stronger. I know I can stand up to bullies and manipulation. I know I can fight for what's right even when it's terrifying. That Thanksgiving dinner was the worst and best day of my life. Worst, because it exposed the ugliest parts of family dynamics, greed, manipulation, betrayal. Best because it revealed truth, strength I didn't know I had, and the deep roots of real love versus shallow pretense. Natasha thought she was taking everything from me when she announced I would get nothing. Instead, she gave me the gift of knowing exactly what I had, everything that truly mattered. So, let me ask you, Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who tried to manipulate a situation for their own benefit? How did you handle it? Drop your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how others have navigated these incredibly difficult family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the pain of family betrayal or the strength it takes to fight back with grace, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more real stories about overcoming family challenges and finding strength you didn't know you had. Share this with someone who needs to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was long and emotional, but these things can't be rushed. Family is complicated. Inheritance brings out the worst in people sometimes. But truth and love and integrity, those things always matter more than money or property. I hope my experience helps someone out there who's facing their own family battle. You're stronger than you think. Stand firm in what's right. Protect those you love. And remember that the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, it's who you become in the process of fighting for it. Take care of yourselves and each other. May your families be filled with genuine love, not manipulative games. And may you always have the courage to fight for what truly matters.